What would you do if your family thought you were a failure for 8 years, while you were secretly one of the most decorated military officers in the country? That's exactly what happened when a three-star general spotted me in the crowd at my brother's Navy SEAL ceremony and decided to blow my cover in front of 300 people. This is the story of how I went from family disappointment to overnight hero, and why the truth almost destroyed us all. I'm standing in the back row of the most prestigious military ceremony in the country, wearing a cheap suit from Target, while my younger brother receives his Navy SEAL trident. Everyone around me is in dress blues medals gleaming under the California sun. Me, I look like I work at a bank. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so damn painful. My name is Alex Parker, and for the past 8 years, my own family has believed I'm the biggest disappointment in 3 generations of military service. They think I dropped out of the Naval Academy to become some mid-level corporate nobody. They think I gave up on everything our family stands for. They have no idea I'm currently a colonel in the United States Army with more classified commendations than my brother will probably earn in his entire career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the truth is always more complicated than it seems. Growing up in Norfolk, Virginia meant one thing. In the Parker household, you serve your country. My grandfather fought in Korea. My dad was a Marine in Vietnam, and my uncle spent 20 years in the Navy. The walls of our house were covered with flags, commendations, and photos of men in uniform who looked nothing like the scared kid I saw in the mirror every morning. The pressure wasn't subtle. It was breakfast conversation, dinner, discussion, and bedtime stories. When you joined the military was never if in our house. It was just a matter of which branch you'd choose and how high you'd climb. Ben, my younger brother by 2 years, ate it up. From the time he could walk, he was doing push-ups in the backyard, asking Dad to tell him stories about combat and planning which special forces unit he'd join. He was the golden child, the natural-born warrior, the one who made our parents' eyes light up with pride. Me, I was different. Don't get me wrong, I love my country and wanted to serve. But I was the kid who preferred chess to football, who read military strategy books instead of war comics, who asked too many questions about the morality of conflict. My parents saw it as overthinking. They wanted soldiers, not philosophers. Still, when my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy arrived senior year of high school, you'd have thought we won the lottery. Mom cried. Dad called everyone he knew. Ben slapped me on the back and said, "Finally, you're gonna be somebody." That hurt more than he knew. Annapolis was everything I expected and nothing I was prepared for. The discipline, the tradition, the unbreakable brotherhood, it was incredible. But more than that, I was good at it. Really good. My tactical analysis scores were off the charts. My leadership evaluations were stellar. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when everything changed. It was spring of my sophomore year when Captain Martinez pulled me aside after a strategic planning exercise. He was this quiet, intense officer who taught advanced intelligence operations, and he had a way of seeing things other people missed. "Parker," he said, "how would you feel about a different kind of service?" I had no idea what he meant, but something in his tone made my pulse quicken. He led me to a small office I'd never seen before where 2 people in civilian clothes were waiting. They didn't introduce themselves with names, just as representatives of a joint intelligence task force that worked across all branches of the military. "We've been watching you," the woman said. She had kind eyes, but a voice that meant business. "Your psychological profile, your analytical capabilities, your ability to think 3 steps ahead of everyone else. You're exactly what we need." What they were offering was a chance to serve my country in ways most people never even know exist. Deep cover operations, intelligence gathering, counterterrorism work that happens in the shadows, where medals aren't given and recognition never comes. The catch: I'd have to leave the academy. Officially, I'd be a dropout. My family, my friends, everyone would think I'd failed. "This is the most important work you'll ever do," the man told me. "But no one can ever know you're doing it. Not your parents, not your brother, not anyone. For all intents and purposes, Alex Parker, the military officer, will cease to exist." I sat in that room for what felt like hours, staring at papers I couldn't fully understand, thinking about Ben and how he'd react, about my parents and their dreams for me, about the life I thought I was supposed to live. But deep down, I knew this was what I was meant to do. Not the glory, not the recognition, not the uniform everyone could see. The real work. The work that mattered. So I said yes. 2 weeks later, I walked out of the Naval Academy for the last time. I told my family I was having second thoughts, that military life wasn't for me, that I wanted to try something different. I watched my father's face crumble. I listened to my mother cry. I felt Ben's disappointment like a physical weight on my chest. "I don't understand," Dad kept saying. "This isn't you, Alex. This isn't who we raised." But it was me, more than they'd ever know. Within a month, I was in a classified training facility in Colorado, learning skills I can't describe and preparing for a life I couldn't explain. My family thought I'd moved to Atlanta for some corporate job. They stopped asking for details after a while, probably because they were too disappointed to care. And that's how I became a ghost in my own life. Officially, I was Alex Parker, business consultant. Unofficially, I was someone else, entirely doing things that would never make the evening news, but kept people safe in ways they'd never understand. The hardest part wasn't the danger or the secrecy. It was sitting at family dinners, listening to Ben talk about his training, watching my parents beam with pride, and knowing I could never share a single thing about what I was really doing. 8 years later, here I am standing in the back of my brother's graduation ceremony, wearing civilian clothes that make me look like everything my family thinks I am. Ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. If they only knew the truth. But today isn't about me. Today is Ben's day, and despite everything, I'm proud of him. He earned this. He deserves the recognition, the ceremony, the pride in our parents' eyes. I'm about to slip out quietly, the way I always do when something catches my attention. General Thompson, the man giving out the tridents, has stopped mid-ceremony. He's scanning the crowd like he's looking for someone, and then his eyes lock on mine. Time freezes. My blood runs cold, because General Thompson isn't just any general. He's the man who signed my last 3 commendations. He's seen my classified file. He knows exactly who I am. And by the look on his face, he's about to blow my cover in front of 300 people, including my entire family. This is not how I planned to spend my Tuesday. But let me rewind to how I got to this moment, because the journey from that Colorado training facility to standing here today was nothing like I expected. The training was brutal. Not physically, though that part nearly killed me, but mentally. They broke down everything I thought I knew about warfare strategy and intelligence, then rebuilt it from the ground up. We learned languages in weeks that most people take years to master. We studied psychological profiles until we could read people like open books. We practiced infiltration techniques that made Navy SEAL training look like summer camp. I wasn't just good at it. I was exceptional. While my classmates struggled with advanced cryptography, I was solving puzzles in half the time. While they memorized cover stories, I was creating entire fictional identities that could pass any background check. My instructors started pulling me aside, asking if I'd ever considered intelligence as a long-term career path. "Parker," Colonel Davies told me after I'd completed a simulated hostage extraction exercise in record time. "In 20 years of doing this, I've never seen anyone with your natural aptitude for strategic thinking under pressure." I finished the 18-month program in 14 months. My final evaluation scores were classified, but let's just say they opened doors I didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, back home, my family was living in a completely different reality. Every Sunday dinner was the same routine. I'd drive down to Norfolk, sit at the same table where we'd eaten since I was 5, and listen to updates about Ben's progress through Butte S training. Mom would have printed out articles about Navy SEALs. Dad would share stories he'd heard from his Navy buddies about how tough the program was. Ben called yesterday, Mom would say, her voice glowing with pride. He's lost 15 pounds, but he says he's never felt stronger. Can you imagine? Our boy is becoming one of the most elite warriors in the world. And then they'd turn to me and the energy would shift. Not hostile exactly, but disappointed. Like they were still waiting for me to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. How's the consulting work, Alex? Dad would ask, the same way you'd ask about someone's cold symptoms. It's good, I'd say, because what else could I say? Keeping busy. Must be nice having regular hours, Ben would add when he was home on leave, and there was something in his tone that suggested he thought my life was easy, soft, safe. If only he knew that the week before I'd spent 72 hours in a safe house in Eastern Europe coordinating an operation that prevented a terrorist attack on a NATO base. Or that the business trip I'd mentioned last month involved infiltrating a weapons trafficking ring that had been eluding international authorities for 3 years. But I'd smile and nod and ask him about his training because that's what good big brothers do. The worst part was watching my parents' faces when Ben would call. They'd light up like Christmas morning. Every achievement, every milestone, every letter from his commanding officers was cause for celebration. They'd frame his photos, share his stories with neighbors, post about him on Facebook with hashtags like proud military family and my hero son. I'd sit there picking at Mom's pot roast, knowing that 2 days earlier, I'd received a classified commendation for work that saved actual lives, and I couldn't share a single detail. That's when Lisa Cruz entered my life. I met her during my second year of active duty at a joint task force briefing in Quantico. She was a captain in the Air Force assigned to the same intelligence division, and the first person I'd met who understood the unique kind of loneliness that comes with the classified service. You look like someone who knows what it's like to lie to everyone you love, she said during a coffee break, and it was such a direct, honest observation that I almost choked on my drink. That obvious, huh? I replied. Takes one to know one. My family thinks I'm a glorified secretary at the Pentagon. Last week, my sister asked if I could get her a tour of the White House because she assumes I just file paperwork all day. Lisa became my lifeline. Not romantically. We were both too dedicated to our work for that kind of complication. But as the one person in my life who understood the weight of carrying secrets. She knew what it felt like to sit through family dinners, where your greatest achievements couldn't be mentioned. She understood the isolation of living two completely separate lives. We'd meet for coffee when we were both in DC, usually late at night, after long days of work that we couldn't fully discuss even with each other. She'd listen to me vent about Ben's latest accomplishment and my parents' reaction. I'd listen to her talk about her younger brother's wedding, where she'd had to leave early for a work emergency that was actually a counterintelligence operation in South America. The hardest part, she told me one night, isn't the secrecy. It's knowing that the people you love most think you're ordinary when you're actually doing the most important work of your life. That hit harder than any physical training I'd endured. It was Lisa who helped me realize that my family's disappointment wasn't really about me. It was about their perception of me, which was based on information they couldn't have. They were proud of Ben because they could see his achievements. They were disappointed in me because they couldn't see mine. That understanding helped, but it didn't make family gatherings any easier. The breaking point came during my 3rd year of service. I just completed my most significant operation to date, something I still can't talk about, but let's just say it involved preventing a cyber attack that could have crippled the Eastern Seaboard's power grid. The mission took 6 months of deep cover work during which my family thought I was consulting for a tech company in Seattle. When it was over, I received my first major commendation. Not just a certificate or a medal, but recognition from the highest levels of military command. The ceremony was held in a secure facility outside Washington, attended by maybe 20 people, all of whom had clearance levels most people don't know exist. General Morrison, who at the time was deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, personally handed me the citation. Lieutenant Colonel Parker, he said, because yes, I'd been promoted twice by then, though my family still thought I was climbing some corporate ladder. Your work on Operation Silent Grid has potentially saved thousands of lives and billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. The United States owes you a debt of gratitude that can never be publicly acknowledged. I stood there in my dress uniform, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the intelligence community, receiving recognition for work that I was genuinely proud of, and all I could think about was how I'd never be able to tell my parents. That night, I called home. Alex! Mom answered on the second ring. Perfect timing, I was just about to call you. Ben got his trident today. He's officially a Navy SEAL. Can you believe it? Your little brother is a real American hero. That's amazing, Mom, I said, and I meant it. I'm really proud of him. He wants to talk to you later. He's out celebrating with his team right now. Oh, Alex, I wish you could see him in his uniform. He looks so distinguished, so confident. Your father is beside himself with pride. I'm sure he is. There was a pause, and then Mom's voice softened. Honey, I know we don't say this enough, but we're proud of you too. I know your path has been different, and maybe we don't always understand it, but you're doing well for yourself. That consulting work seems to be going nicely. I looked down at the citation in my hands at the words, extraordinary heroism and distinguished service, and felt something break inside my chest. Thanks, Mom, I managed to say. That means a lot. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time, holding that piece of paper that represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I could never share. Lisa found me there 3 hours later. I'd given her a key for emergencies, and apparently this qualified. Rough night? She asked, settling beside me on the couch. I handed her the citation without saying anything. She read it quietly, then looked at me. This is incredible, Alex. This is the kind of work people dream of doing. Yeah, I said. Too bad it might as well not exist. It exists? She said firmly. It matters. The fact that your family doesn't know doesn't make it less real. But sitting there that night with my greatest professional achievement in my hands, and my family celebrating Ben's very public success, I couldn't help but wonder if Lisa was wrong. If a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it really make a sound? If you save lives and no one knows, are you really a hero? I was about to find out that sometimes the universe has a way of answering questions you didn't know you were asking. But first, I had to get through 3 more years of living this double life, watching my brother become everything my family wanted in a son, while I remained the disappointing footnote in the Parker family story. Little did I know that everything was about to change in the most public way possible. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving of my 5th year in service. Ben had been dating Sarah for about 8 months, and apparently he'd been planning something special. Mom had been dropping hints for weeks about how excited she was for the family gathering, how she had a feeling this might be a memorable holiday. I should have seen it coming. I'd driven down from DC that Thursday morning, already exhausted from a week of intelligence briefings about a developing situation in Southeast Asia. My phone had been buzzing constantly with encrypted messages, but I'd managed to silence it before walking into my parents' house. The smell of turkey and Mom's famous stuffing should have been comforting, but I felt on edge. That nagging sensation you get when you know something important is happening somewhere else and you're not where you're supposed to be. Ben and Sarah arrived around noon, both of them practically glowing with excitement. Sarah kept fidgeting with her purse, and Ben had this nervous energy that reminded me of the night before his first SEAL mission. We were just sitting down to eat when Ben stood up, his face serious but his eyes bright. Before we start, he said, Sarah and I have something we want to share with everyone. He got down on one knee, right there in the dining room between Mom's good china and the candlesticks Grandma had left us. Sarah burst into tears before he even finished asking the question, and Mom started crying so hard she had to excuse herself to get tissues. It was perfect. It was beautiful. It was everything a family moment should be. And then my phone rang. Not the regular ringtone, the specific urgent tone that meant I had exactly 15 minutes to call back before backup protocols kicked in. The tone that meant people's lives might be hanging in the balance. Everyone looked at me as I glanced at the screen. Ben was still on one knee. Sarah was still crying, and my parents were waiting for me to turn off my phone and join the celebration. "I'm sorry," I said, my throat tight. "I have to take this." The silence in the room was deafening. "Alex?" Dad said, his voice carefully controlled. "Can it wait? This is your brother's engagement." I looked at Ben, still holding the ring, his face starting to shift from joy to confusion to something that looked like hurt. I looked at Sarah, wiping her eyes with Mom's tissues. I looked at my parents, who were staring at me like I just announced I was joining a cult. "I'm really sorry," I said again. "It's work. It's urgent." I stepped out onto the back porch and answered the call. Lisa's voice, tight with stress, cut through the autumn air. "Alex, we need you in DC immediately. The situation in Manila just escalated. They're moving up the timeline, and you're the only one with the language skills and regional expertise to coordinate the response." "How immediately? You should have been on the road an hour ago." I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of my family celebrating inside. Through the window, I could see Ben hugging Sarah, Mom taking pictures, Dad opening a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. "I'll be there in 2 hours," I said. When I walked back inside, the energy had shifted. They were still celebrating, but there was a forced quality to it now, like they were trying to pretend I hadn't just interrupted the most important moment of Ben's life to take a work call. "Everything okay?" Ben asked, and I could hear the edge in his voice. "Yeah, just a client emergency. I'm really sorry, but I have to drive back to DC tonight." The look that passed between my parents was one I'd seen before, but never quite this sharp. Disappointment mixed with frustration, mixed with something that looked like embarrassment. "Tonight," Mom said. Alex, it's Thanksgiving. It's your brother's engagement dinner." "I know, Mom. I'm really sorry. This is just one of those situations where if I don't handle it tonight, a lot of people are going to be in trouble tomorrow." Which was true, just not in the way they thought. "What kind of consulting is so urgent that it can't wait until Monday?" Dad asked, and for a moment I thought he might actually be starting to piece things together. "The kind that pays really well," I said, hating myself for the lie, but having no choice. Ben stood up then, and his expression had shifted completely. "You know what, Alex, forget it. You've made it pretty clear where your priorities are." "Ben, that's not fair." "Isn't it? When's the last time you stayed for an entire family dinner? When's the last time you were here for something important without checking your phone every 10 minutes or rushing off for some business emergency?" I wanted to tell him about the arms dealers I'd helped capture in Morocco. I wanted to explain about the terrorist financing network I'd helped dismantle in Eastern Europe. I wanted him to understand that my absences weren't because I didn't care, but because I cared too much about things I couldn't explain. Instead, I said, "I'm doing the best I can." "Are you?" Sarah asked quietly, and something in her tone made everyone turn to look at her. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're doing the bare minimum." The words hit harder than they should have, maybe because there was truth in them. Not the truth she thought, but truth nonetheless. I was doing the bare minimum when it came to my family because I was giving everything else to my country. "Sarah," Ben said, putting a protective arm around her, "you don't know the whole story." "I know enough," she replied. "I know that your parents talk about you constantly, about how proud they are of your service, about how you're risking your life for your country. And I know that Alex shows up when it's convenient and leaves when something better comes along." "That's not what's happening here," I said, but even as I said it, I knew how it looked. "Then what is happening?" Dad asked, because from where I sit, it looks like my son is prioritizing his job over his family. Again. I stood there for a long moment, looking at these people I loved more than anything in the world, knowing they saw me as selfish and uncaring and ordinary, knowing they had no idea that the phone call I'd just taken was about preventing an international incident that could destabilize an entire region. "I have to go," I said finally. I hugged Ben, and Sarah kissed Mom goodbye and shook Dad's hand. The drive back to DC was the longest 3 hours of my life. I spent the next 72 hours in a secure facility, coordinating with assets across 3 continents to prevent what intelligence suggested was an imminent attack on American interests in the Philippines. We stopped it. 3 days of round-the-clock work, and we actually stopped it. But all I could think about was the look on Ben's face when I walked out of his engagement dinner. Lisa found me on Saturday night slumped over my desk in the intelligence center staring at reports I'd read a dozen times. "Go home, Alex," she said. "You've been here for 3 straight days." "Can't. Still waiting on confirmation from Manila." "The confirmation came in 2 hours ago. Operation successful. Threat neutralized. You can go home." I looked up at her, realizing that I'd been so exhausted I'd missed the final reports. "We did it?" I asked. "We did it. Potential casualty count was in the hundreds, Alex. Maybe thousands. You saved a lot of lives this week." I should have felt proud. I should have felt accomplished. Instead, I felt empty. My family thinks I'm a selfish jerk who prioritizes work over everything that matters. Lisa sat down across from me, her expression softening. "Your family doesn't understand what you do. They can't understand what I do. There's a difference." "Is there?" she asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're carrying this burden alone and it's eating you alive." She was right. The isolation was becoming unbearable. Every family gathering was a performance. Every conversation was an exercise in careful editing. Every relationship in my personal life was built on a foundation of necessary lies. "Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just told them," I said. "You know what would happen. You'd lose your clearance, your career, and possibly your freedom." "And for what? So your parents can brag about you at dinner parties?" "No," I said, "so they'd know that when I miss family dinners, it's not because I don't care. It's because I care so much about protecting people like them that I'm willing to give up everything else." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that I still think about to this day. "The hardest part about this job isn't the danger or the stress or even the secrecy. It's knowing that the people you love most will never really know who you are, and wondering if the person you're protecting them from finding out is actually protecting them, or just protecting yourself." That hit me like a physical blow, because I'd never considered that maybe my secrecy wasn't just about duty. Maybe it was about fear. Fear that even if they knew the truth, they still wouldn't be proud of me. Fear that my accomplishments, even the real ones, would never measure up to Ben's very public heroism. What if I told them and they still thought Ben was the better son? I asked. "Then they'd be wrong," Lisa said simply. "But Alex, you can't live your life trying to win a competition your parents don't even know you're in." I knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two very different things. That Sunday, I drove back to Norfolk for Ben and Sarah's engagement party. I brought a gift. I smiled at the right moments. I made small talk with relatives I barely knew. But the whole time, I felt like I was watching someone else's life through a window. Ben pulled me aside near the end of the evening. "Look, Alex," he said, "I'm sorry about what Sarah said at Thanksgiving. She was out of line." "She wasn't wrong, though," I replied. "Yeah, she was. I know you're doing your best. I know your job is demanding. I just wish," he trailed off, looking uncertain. "You wish what?" "I wish I understood what you actually do. I mean, I know you say consulting, but consulting on what? For who you disappear for weeks at a time, you take urgent calls during family dinners. You look exhausted half the time, but you never really explain any of it." For a moment, I considered telling him everything, not the classified details, but the basic truth. That I was military, that I served my country just like he did, that my absence weren't about indifference, but about duty. But then I remembered the oath I'd taken, the clearances I'd signed, the lives that depended on my ability to maintain my cover. "It's just complicated work stuff," I said. "Nothing as interesting as what you do." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to push harder. "Okay," he said finally. "But, Alex, whatever you're doing, wherever you're going, just remember that this family, these moments, they matter too." "I know," I said. "I'll try to do better." But even as I said it, I knew I couldn't promise that. Because somewhere in the world, there would always be another crisis, another threat, another mission that only I could handle. And my family would always come second to that. The question was whether I could live with that choice, or whether it would eventually destroy everything I was trying to protect. Which brings me back to this moment, standing in the back row of the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, watching my brother receive his SEAL trident while I'm dressed like I sell insurance for a living. I'd almost missed the ceremony entirely. A last-minute intelligence briefing in DC had run long, and by the time I'd caught a red-eye to San Diego, the ceremony was already underway. I'd grabbed the first civilian clothes I could find in my go bag, which happened to be a rumpled navy suit that looked like it came from a discount store. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the most qualified military officer in attendance, and I looked like I'd wandered in off the street. Ben looked incredible up there. Confident, proud, every inch the warrior our family had always dreamed he'd become. His dress blues were immaculate, his posture perfect, and when General Thompson placed that trident on his uniform, I felt a genuine surge of pride for my little brother. This was his moment. He'd earned it through years of brutal training, through challenges that would have broken most people, through a dedication to excellence that I genuinely admired. Despite everything complicated between us, I was proud to be his brother. The families around me were taking pictures, wiping away tears, beaming with obvious pride. I could see my parents in the third row, Mom clutching Dad's arm, both of them glowing like they'd just won the lottery. This was the culmination of everything they'd hoped for when they'd raised us with stories of military honor and service to country. I was planning to slip out quietly after the Trident presentation, the way I always did at family events. Arrive late, stay in the background, leave before anyone could corner me with questions about my mysterious career. It was a routine I'd perfected over the years. But then, something happened that shattered my carefully maintained anonymity. General Thompson had just finished presenting Ben with his trident when he paused at the podium. Instead of moving on to the next graduate, he began scanning the crowd with the focused intensity of someone looking for a specific person. My blood ran cold. I knew that look. I'd seen it in classified briefings when someone important was about to be called out for recognition. The kind of look that meant someone's cover was about to be blown in a very public way. Our eyes met across a sea of dress uniforms and proud families. General Robert Thompson, 3 stars, former Special Operations Command, current Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence. The man who'd personally signed my promotion to colonel. The man who knew exactly who I was and what I'd been doing for the past 8 years. Time seemed to slow down as recognition dawned on his face. I could see him processing what he was seeing. Colonel Alex Parker, one of his most decorated intelligence officers, standing in civilian clothes at a SEAL graduation ceremony. I shook my head slightly, a tiny gesture that I hoped would remind him of the need for operational security. But instead of looking away, his expression shifted to something that looked almost amused. This was not good. I started backing toward the exit, trying to blend into the crowd of families who were beginning to mill around as the formal ceremony concluded. My plan was simple: get to my rental car, drive straight to the airport, and pretend this never happened. But General Thompson had other plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the amphitheater, stopping me dead in my tracks. "Before we conclude today's ceremony, I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special in our audience." The entire crowd turned to look at him, including my family. I could see Ben's confused expression, my parents' polite attention, Sarah's mild curiosity. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I really, but I had a very bad feeling about it. It's not often that we have the opportunity to honor excellence across multiple branches of our armed forces in one location. General Thompson continued, his eyes locked on mine from across the crowd. And today, we're fortunate to have with us an officer whose service record exemplifies the very best of American military intelligence. I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion. I wanted to run, to shout, to do something to stop what was happening. But I was frozen in place by the terrible certainty that my 8-year cover was about to be blown in front of 300 people, including my entire family. This individual has served with distinction in classified operations across multiple theaters, has received commendations at the highest levels of military command, and has recently been promoted to the rank of colonel in the United States Army. The murmur that ran through the crowd was audible. Families were looking around trying to figure out who he was talking about. My parents looked puzzled. Ben looked intrigued. Sarah looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Colonel Parker," General Thompson called out, his voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. "Would you please join me at the podium?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every head in the crowd turned, following the general's gaze to where I stood frozen in the back row. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, could sense the confusion and curiosity rippling through the audience. But the expressions that mattered most were the ones I could see clearly in the third row. My father's mouth was slightly open, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been understanding. My mother looked like she'd been struck by lightning, her hand still clutching Dad's arm, but her entire body rigid with shock. Ben's expression was the most complex. I could see him processing what he'd just heard, trying to reconcile the brother he thought he knew with the person General Thompson was describing. Confusion, surprise, and what looked like the beginning of hurt flickered across his features. "Colonel Parker," General Thompson repeated, and there was a note of gentle insistence in his voice that told me he wasn't going to let this go. I had a choice to make. I could refuse, cause a scene, maintain my cover at the cost of creating an even bigger spectacle. Or I could walk down there, acknowledge who I really was, and deal with the consequences. But looking at my family's faces, seeing the dawning realization in their eyes, I understood that the choice had already been made for me. My cover wasn't just blown, it was obliterated. So I did the only thing I could do. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and began walking toward the podium through a crowd that was now openly staring at the man in the rumpled civilian suit, who apparently wasn't who anyone thought he was. Each step felt like it took an eternity. I could feel my family's eyes tracking my movement, could sense the weight of their shock and confusion, and probably anger. 8 years of careful deception, 8 years of letting them believe I was a disappointment, 8 years of protecting my cover and my mission all undone in 30 seconds by a 3-star general who decided this was the moment for truth. As I approached the podium, General Thompson extended his hand with what I could only describe as a satisfied smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced as I reluctantly shook his hand, "I present Colonel Alex Parker, United States Army Intelligence recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star, with Valor and the Intelligence Community Medal of Merit." The applause that erupted was automatic, the kind of respectful recognition military audiences give to decorated service members. But I wasn't listening to the applause. I was looking at my family, seeing 8 years of lies and misdirection crashing down around them and wondering if they'd ever be able to forgive me for letting them believe their son and brother was a failure when he was actually everything they'd raised him to be. The look on Ben's face told me this conversation was going to be even more difficult than I'd imagined. As the applause died down, I stood there at the podium next to General Thompson, acutely aware that my entire world had just been turned upside down in front of 300 witnesses. Colonel Parker's work has been instrumental in preventing multiple threats to American interests overseas. General Thompson continued, apparently determined to make my exposure as thorough as possible. His expertise in psychological operations and strategic intelligence has saved countless lives, though the nature of his service requires that most of his achievements remain classified. I caught movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see Lisa making her way through the crowd toward the podium. She was in her Air Force dress blues, looking every inch the decorated officer she was, and her expression was a mixture of sympathy and barely concealed amusement. "General Thompson," she said as she approached, "I believe you're embarrassing Colonel Parker." "Captain Cruz," the general replied with obvious familiarity, "I think it's high time Colonel Parker received some recognition that his family could actually witness." Lisa stepped up beside me, and her presence was both comforting and mortifying. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Captain Lisa Cruz, Air Force Intelligence. Colonel Parker and I have worked together on several classified operations, and I can personally attest to his exceptional service record." The crowd was eating this up, a real-life military intelligence story unfolding right in front of them at what was supposed to be a routine SEAL graduation. But all I could focus on was my family's faces. My father looked like he was processing information that fundamentally challenged everything he thought he knew about his older son. My mother appeared to be cycling through emotions so quickly, I couldn't track them all. And Ben looked like someone had just told him that everything he'd believed about his brother for the past 8 years was a lie. Which, to be fair, was exactly what had just happened. "Thank you, General Thompson, Captain Cruz," I managed to say, into the microphone, my voice steadier than I felt. "I appreciate the recognition, but I think we should let these new SEALs and their families enjoy their moment." But General Thompson wasn't done. "Actually, Colonel, there's one more thing. Captain Cruz, would you do the honors?" Lisa stepped forward with what I now realized was a small presentation box. "Colonel Parker, by order of the Department of Defense, you are hereby promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, effective immediately." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. A promotion ceremony. They were conducting an impromptu promotion ceremony at my brother's SEAL graduation, in front of my family, who just learned I was in the military at all. The applause this time was thunderous, led by the SEALs themselves, who understood exactly how significant this moment was. But I barely heard it over the sound of my own thoughts racing. As Lisa pinned the general's star on my civilian jacket, an act that looked as surreal as it felt, I caught sight of my family again. Dad was on his feet now, clapping with tears in his eyes. Mom looked like she might faint, and Ben was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Speech." Someone in the crowd called out, and the call was taken up by others until it became a chant. I looked at General Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. There was no way out of this now. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out over a sea of faces that included my entire family, and tried to figure out how to explain 8 years of deception in a way that wouldn't destroy every relationship I cared about. "I want to start by saying how proud I am of my brother Ben and all the new SEALs being honored today," I began. "Their achievements are public celebrated and well-deserved. They represent the very best of our military's fighting spirit." I paused, searching for the right words. "My path has been different. For the past 8 years, I've served in roles that required absolute secrecy, not just professional discretion, but complete operational security that extended to every aspect of my personal life. I could see my parents hanging on every word, trying to reconcile this new information with their memories of family dinners and missed holidays and work calls that seemed to come at the worst possible times. To my family, I continued looking directly at them. "I want you to know that every time I left early, every time I missed an important moment, every time I seemed distant or distracted, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared so much about protecting people like you that I was willing to sacrifice everything else, including your understanding of who I really am." The silence in the amphitheater was complete now. Even the SEALs had stopped their casual conversations to listen. "I know this is confusing. I know it's going to raise questions I still can't answer. But I need you to understand that everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been in service to something bigger than myself. Just like Ben, just like every service member here today. I stepped back from the microphone as the crowd erupted in applause again. But I was only watching my family. Ben was walking toward the podium, his expression unreadable, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. The formal ceremony concluded shortly after that, but the real confrontation was just beginning. As families dispersed to take photos and celebrate with their newly minted seals, my parents made their way through the crowd toward me with the determined look of people who had 8 years' worth of questions and weren't leaving without answers. "Alex," Mom said when she reached me and her voice was shaking. "I don't understand." "You're a general. You've been a general this whole time." "Not a general," I corrected gently. "I was a colonel until about 10 minutes ago. But yes, I've been in the army since I left Annapolis." "But you said you dropped out," Dad said, his voice tight with confusion and what might have been anger. "You said military life wasn't for you." I had to say that. The program I was recruited into required a cover identity that even my family couldn't know about. Ben appeared at Dad's shoulder, still in his dress blues, still wearing the trident that represented everything he'd worked for. "So, when you said you were disappointed in military life, when you said you wanted to try something different, you were lying." The word lying hit harder than I expected. "Ben, I was recruited into a classified program that required me to maintain a civilian cover. I couldn't tell anyone, including family." "You couldn't or you wouldn't?" Mom asked, and there was hurt in her voice that made my chest tight. "I couldn't. Legally, ethically, professionally. Lives depended on my ability to maintain that cover." "Whose lives?" Ben demanded. "What was so important that you let us think you were a failure for 8 years?" I looked around at the crowd still milling about, at the families celebrating their sons' achievements at the very public setting where we were having this very private conversation. "Can we do this somewhere else?" I asked. "No," Dad said firmly. "We're doing this now. I want to know why my son has been lying to me for 8 years about the most fundamental thing in his life." Sarah appeared beside Ben, taking his arm in a gesture of support that somehow made this whole situation more painful. She was looking at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was. "You made me feel terrible," she said quietly. "At Thanksgiving, at the engagement party, I thought you were selfish and uncaring, and you let me think that." "I had to," I said. "My cover identity required that even my family believe I was a civilian." "But why?" Mom pressed. "What kind of work requires you to lie to your own parents?" I looked at Lisa, who had stayed close enough to provide moral support, but far enough away to give us privacy. She nodded encouragingly, reminding me that I could share the general nature of my work, even if I couldn't discuss specifics. "Intelligence work," I said. "Counterterrorism threat assessment operations that prevent attacks on American interests. The kind of work that happens in places and ways that can never be made public." "Like what Ben does," Dad said slowly, "but in secret." "Similar mission, different methods." Ben stepped closer, and I could see him struggling with something. "The night you left my engagement dinner, that wasn't really a business emergency, was it?" "No. It was a developing situation in the Philippines that required immediate attention. The threat was neutralized, but it took 3 days of continuous work." "People could have died if you hadn't left," Sarah said, and it wasn't really a question. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of 8 years of misunderstood absences, missed moments, and sacrificed connections. "All those times you seemed distracted," Mom said slowly. "All those phone calls you had to take, all those trips you had to make." "I was working. I was serving. Just not in a way you could see or understand." "But we could have understood," Ben said, and there was pain in his voice now. "If you'd told us you were military, if you'd told us you were serving your country, we would have supported you." "I couldn't tell you. The security protocols for my level of clearance require absolute operational security. That means no one knows who you really are unless they absolutely have to." So you chose your job over your family, Dad said, and the accusation in his tone made me flinch. I chose to serve my country in the way I was asked to serve, even though it meant sacrificing my relationship with the people I love most. But you had a choice, Ben pressed. You could have said no, you could have stayed at the academy, become a regular officer, had a career we could be proud of, instead of one we couldn't even know about. I could have, I admitted. But this work, this mission, it was what I was best at. It was where I could make the biggest difference. More difference than being part of your family, Mom asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. I looked at these people who'd raised me, who'd loved me, who'd supported me even when they thought I was disappointing them, and tried to find words that would make them understand. Every threat we've prevented, every attack we've stopped, every life we've saved that includes all of you, I said finally. I chose to protect strangers so that the people I love could live in a world where they never had to know how close danger really was. That's very noble, Sarah said, and there was an edge to her voice. But nobility doesn't make up for 8 years of deception. I know, I said, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every missed dinner, every interrupted celebration, every moment when you thought I didn't care. But I need you to understand that everything I did because I cared too much to do anything else. Ben stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing everything he'd just learned. Finally, he spoke. I spent 8 years thinking my big brother was a disappointment. I spent 8 years feeling like I was the only one in the family who understood what service meant. I spent 8 years being the son our parents could be proud of. Ben, I started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I spent 8 years thinking all of that, and it turns out you were serving at a level I can't even comprehend. It turns out you were making sacrifices I never had to make. It turns out you're the person I always wanted to be, and I had no idea. The raw emotion in his voice nearly broke me. You were the person Dad and Mom always wanted you to be, I said. Everything about your service, your achievements, your dedication, that's real. That's worthy of pride. My path doesn't diminish yours. Doesn't it? He asked. Because right now, I feel like everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in it, was wrong. And that's when I realized that my 8 years of sacrifice hadn't just cost me a relationship with my family. It had cost Ben his understanding of his own place in the world we'd grown up in. The truth I'd protected so carefully hadn't just hidden my achievements. It had fundamentally altered how everyone I loved saw themselves and each other. The question now was whether we could find a way forward that honored both the service we'd each given and the family we'd always been, even when we didn't know who we all really were. 6 months later, I'm standing in my parents' backyard in Norfolk, watching my father flip burgers on the same grill he's been using since I was 10 years old. It's the 4th of July, and for the first time in 8 years, I'm not worried about getting an urgent phone call that will pull me away from a family gathering. Not because the threats have stopped, but because my new position allows me to delegate more of the immediate response work to the exceptional officers who work under me. Being a general, it turns out, comes with some unexpected perks. Alex, can you grab the potato salad from the kitchen? Mom calls out, and I notice she doesn't hesitate before using my name anymore. For a while after the ceremony, she kept starting to call me by my rank like she was still trying to reconcile the son she knew with the officer she'd discovered. As I head inside, I catch sight of something that still stops me in my tracks every time I see it. On the mantel in the living room next to Ben's seal trident in its display case sits a small collection of my non-classified commendations. Lisa had helped me put together a display of awards and photos that I could actually share with my family. Nothing that would compromise operational security, but enough to give them a window into the career they'd never known I had. The Bronze Star sits next to a photo of me with my unit in Afghanistan. Their faces blurred for security reasons, but the camaraderie visible even in the edited image. There's my promotion certificate to colonel, the one that had been gathering dust in a filing cabinet for 3 years. And in the center, the flag that had been flown over the Capitol in honor of my promotion to Brigadier General. It's not much considering 8 years of service, but it's more than I ever thought I'd be able to share with them. Still weird seeing all that, isn't it? Ben's voice comes from behind me. He's holding two beers and offers me one as he joins me in front of the mantel. Weird isn't the word I'd use, I say, accepting the beer. More like surreal. I keep looking at these photos and trying to reconcile them with the guy who used to disappear during family dinners to take mysterious work calls. I take a sip of beer and study my brother's face. The past 6 months haven't been easy for any of us. There were some difficult conversations, some hurt feelings that needed to be worked through, and a lot of adjustments to how we all saw each other and ourselves. But Ben has surprised me the most. After the initial shock wore off, he threw himself into understanding what my career had actually entailed. He'd researched military intelligence, asked Lisa pointed questions about the kind of work we did, and gradually began to piece together why my absences had always seemed so urgent and non-negotiable. I owe you an apology, he says suddenly. For what? For making you feel like you had to prove something to this family. For letting you carry that burden alone for so long. I look at him, this man who's become everything our parents ever dreamed of in a military son, and shake my head. Ben, you didn't know. You couldn't have known. Maybe not the specifics, but I should have known you better. I should have trusted that if you were missing family stuff, there was a good reason. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt instead of assuming the worst. You gave me exactly what I needed you to give me, I say. You gave me a cover that worked because it was believable. If you'd suspected I was still military, if you'd started asking questions, it could have compromised everything. That's a very generous way to look at it. It's the truth. Ben takes a long drink of his beer, then looks at me with an expression I've never seen before. You know what the hardest part is for me now? What? Realizing that while I was training to be a warrior, you were already out there being one. While I was learning to fight, you were actually fighting. While I was preparing to serve my country, you were already saving it. The weight of his words hits me harder than I expected. Ben, that's not true. What you do, what SEALs do, it's just as important. More important in a lot of ways. Is it, though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been preventing wars while I've been training to fight them. I set down my beer and turned to face him fully. You want to know the truth? The real truth about the difference between what you do and what I do? He nods. What I do happens in shadows, in offices, in briefing rooms where the only people who know about it are other people with security clearances. It's important work, but it's invisible work. What you do, what SEALs do that happens in the real world, with real bullets, real consequences, real courage that everyone can see. I pause, trying to find the right words. You know, how many times over the past 8 years I've sat in a command center coordinating operations where other people took the real risks. You know how many times I've made strategic decisions from the safety of a secure facility, while people like you put their lives on the line to execute those decisions. Ben's expression shifts as he processes what I'm saying. The intelligence I gather, the threats I help identify, the operations I plan, none of that matters if there aren't warriors like you willing to act on it. You're not training to fight wars, I'm preventing Ben. You're training to win wars I help identify before they become unsalvageable. So we're partners, he says slowly. We're brothers, I correct. We always were. We just serve in different ways. The conversation is interrupted by Dad calling us outside for the ceremonial flag, raising a tradition in the Parker household that dates back to my grandfather's time in Korea. But as we head toward the back door, Ben stops me with a hand on my shoulder. Alex, he says, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for the way you've handled all of this. The secrecy, the isolation, the sacrifice. I don't think I could have done it. Yes, you could have, I say, because you're a Parker and Parkers serve their country however they're called to serve. Even when it means sacrificing everything else, especially then. The flag ceremony is simple, but meaningful. Dad raises the colors while the rest of us stand at attention in our backyard, the same way we have every 4th of July for as long as I can remember. But this year feels different. This year, when Dad looks at his son standing side by side, I can see the pride in his eyes for both of us. After the ceremony, as we're settling in for the afternoon, Lisa arrives with a covered dish and a smile that tells me she has news. "General Parker," she says, using my new rank with just enough emphasis to remind everyone that it's still new, "I have something for you." She hands me an official-looking envelope with Department of Defense letterhead. "Congratulations," she says before I can open it. "You've been selected for assignment to the Pentagon, Deputy Director of Strategic Intelligence." The silence that follows is broken by Mom's delighted gasp. "Washington. You'll be in Washington." "Looks like it," I say, scanning the orders. "Permanent assignment. No travel requirements. Regular hours." "What does that mean?" Dad asks. Lisa grins. "It means General Parker will be able to make it to family dinners from now on." The celebration that erupts is everything I could have hoped for. Mom starts making plans for holiday visits. Dad begins talking about how he can finally give people a straight answer when they ask what his older son does for a living. And Sarah immediately starts planning double dates now that both Parker brothers will be stateside. But the moment that means the most comes later when Ben pulls me aside as the party is winding down. "You know what this means, right?" he says. "That I'll have to actually show up for Sunday dinner." "It means we get to be brothers again. Really be brothers, not just two guys who happen to share parents and show up to the same family events." "We were always brothers, Ben." "No," he says, shaking his head. "We were siblings. There's a difference. Brothers know each other. Brothers trust each other. Brothers support each other's dreams even when they don't understand them." He's right, and we both know it. "I'd like to try again," he says. "I'd like to try being your brother instead of just your sibling." "I'd like that too." 3 months later, I'm standing at another podium, but this time it's my own ceremony. The formal promotion to Brigadier General that had been interrupted by Ben Seal graduation is being held at the Pentagon with all the pomp and circumstance that usually accompanies such events. My parents are in the front row, both in their best clothes, both beaming with the kind of pride I'd only ever seen them show for Ben's achievements. Ben is beside them in his dress blues, having requested leave specifically to attend. Sarah is taking pictures, and Lisa is in the officer section grinning like she's personally responsible for my success. Which in many ways she is. As I stand there listening to my new commanding officer read my citation listing achievements that can finally be acknowledged publicly, I think about the journey that brought me to this moment. 8 years of secrecy, 8 years of sacrifice, 8 years of serving in shadows, while my family thought I'd given up on everything they valued. But looking out at their faces, now seeing the pride and love and understanding in their eyes, I realize that the sacrifice was worth it. Not just because of the lives saved, or the threats prevented, or the missions accomplished, but because it led to this moment of truth, this reconciliation, this chance to be both the officer my country needed and the son and brother my family deserved. The truth is, you don't always get to choose between duty and family. Sometimes duty requires you to sacrifice family, and sometimes family requires you to sacrifice duty. But if you're lucky, if you're patient, if you're willing to endure years of misunderstanding and isolation and pain, sometimes you get a chance to have both. Sometimes you get a chance to serve your country and your family at the same time. Sometimes you get a chance to be exactly who you were meant to be without having to hide any part of yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the people who love you most are able to love you even more when they finally know who you really are. The ceremony concludes with the traditional pinning of the stars, and as my parents step forward to perform the honors, I can't help but smile at the irony. 8 years ago, They watched me walk away from everything they thought I wanted. Today, they're pinning stars on my uniform in recognition of everything I'd actually accomplished. Ben steps up after them, and instead of saluting, he pulls me into a hug that says everything we've never been able to say to each other. "Welcome home, General," he whispers. And for the first time in 8 years, I really am home. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love require the deepest sacrifices, and sometimes, the people who know us least are the ones who need our protection most. Have you ever had to choose between duty and family? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about hidden truths and unexpected revelations, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.